There is something within the human heart that refuses to accept goodbye as final. You may try to move forward, you may learn to smile again. You may even build a life around the absence, but deep within there remains a quiet question that never fully leaves you. Will I see them again? It is not loud, it does not always demand attention, but it lingers, especially in the stillness, especially in the moments when memory becomes stronger than the present. You remember the sound of their voice, you remember the way they laughed, the way they looked at you, the way they made the ordinary feel meaningful. And when they are gone, it is not just a person that is missing, it is a part of your world that feels as though it has been taken away. And in that emptiness, something begins to reach beyond what is seen, beyond what is known, searching for reassurance that love does not simply end at the grave. This longing is not something to be ashamed of. It is not weakness, it is not lack of faith. It is in fact one of the deepest evidences that you were created for something more than this life. There is a cry within the soul that understands, perhaps more than the mind can explain, that death was never meant to be the end. And yet, without truth, that longing can lead the heart in many directions. It can lead to imagination, to assumptions, to beliefs shaped more by desire than by what is real. Oh, but listen carefully, because this is where the Holy Spirit begins his gentle work. He does not ignore your longing. He does not silence your questions. He does not rebuke your tears. Instead, he comes near, so near, and he begins to guide that longing, not into confusion, but into truth. You see, the danger is not in the desire to see loved ones again. The danger is in allowing that desire to define truth, instead of allowing truth to shape that desire. So many people build their understanding of what happens after death based on what they feel should happen. They imagine reunions, conversations, familiar scenes playing out just as they remember. And while it may bring temporary comfort, it is not always grounded in what the Spirit reveals. The Holy Spirit is not the spirit of human emotion. He is the Spirit of truth. And truth does not bend to our longing, it refines it, it purifies it. It lifts it out of the realm of uncertainty and anchors it in something eternal. And when he begins to speak to the heart, something changes. The question is no longer driven by fear or desperation, but by a quiet trust that there is a divine order beyond what we can see. And yet, even as he leads, he understands the tenderness of your heart. He understands what it is to love deeply. He understands what it is to feel loss. And so he does not rush you. He does not overwhelm you with answers. He walks with you, step by step, gently shifting your focus from what you have lost to what is eternal. Because the truth is, this longing you feel is not just about seeing someone again. It is about something greater. It is about eternity calling to your soul. It is about a reality beyond this life that you were created for, whether you fully understand it yet or not. And as the Holy Spirit begins to reveal truth, you will find that your longing does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes deeper, purer, and more aligned with the heart of God. It is no longer a desperate grasp for what was, but a quiet anticipation of what is to come under his divine purpose. And in that moment you begin to realize, this question was never meant to lead you into confusion. It was meant to lead you into truth. And as that longing begins to settle within the heart, there comes a moment, very quiet yet deeply significant, when a choice must be made. Will you allow your emotions to define what is true, or will you allow truth to reshape your emotions? Because these two do not always walk together. One is led by what it feels, the other is led by what is revealed. You see, feelings are powerful. They can comfort, they can connect, they can even convince, but they are not always reliable. They rise and fall with memory, with pain, with desire. And when it comes to something as sacred and eternal as what happens after death, feelings alone are not enough to guide you safely. They may whisper what you want to hear, but they cannot always reveal what is real. This is why the Holy Spirit comes not as a reflection of human emotion, but as the Spirit of truth. He does not echo our assumptions. He does not bend to our expectations. He does not build on imagination. He reveals what has already been established in the eternal wisdom of God. And sometimes that truth does not immediately comfort the natural mind. Sometimes it challenges what we have believed. Sometimes it gently dismantles ideas we have held onto for years, not to harm us but to bring us into alignment with what is unshakable. There are many voices in this world that speak about life after death. Some are shaped by culture, some by tradition, some by personal experiences that feel very real. People speak of seeing loved ones, hearing their voices, feeling their presence. And while these experiences can be deeply emotional, the Holy Spirit does not confirm truth based on how real something feels. He confirms truth based on what is divinely established. This is where discernment becomes essential, because not everything that feels spiritual is from the Spirit of God. Not everything that brings comfort carries truth. And if the heart is not anchored in the guidance of the Holy Spirit, it can easily be led into deception, subtle, convincing, and dangerous. But oh, how faithful He is! He does not leave you to navigate this alone. He does not expect you to figure it out through reasoning or emotion. He comes as a guide, a teacher, a revealer. And when you begin to yield to His presence, something remarkable happens. The confusion begins to clear, the noise begins to fade, and in its place comes a quiet, steady knowing, not driven by feeling but by truth. You begin to sense the difference between what originates from the soul and what comes from the spirit. One seeks to satisfy longing, the other establishes truth. One reacts to pain, the other brings clarity. And as this distinction becomes clearer, your heart becomes steadier. It does not mean the emotions disappear, it does not mean the longing is gone, but it means they are no longer in control. They are no longer the foundation upon which you build your understanding. Instead, they come into alignment with something higher, something eternal, something that does not shift with circumstance. And this is where true peace begins, not in having every question answered the way you expected, but in knowing that what you believe is rooted in truth. The kind of peace that does not depend on imagined outcomes, but rests in divine assurance. Because the Holy Spirit does not come to entertain curiosity. He comes to reveal truth that anchors the soul. And when He speaks, He does not speak to satisfy emotion, He speaks to establish eternity within you. And in that moment you begin to understand, truth is not always what you feel, it is what the Spirit reveals. And once the heart begins to rest in truth rather than emotion, another question quietly rises, one that has stirred humanity for generations. What truly happens in the moment after death? Not what we imagine, not what we have heard in passing, but what is real, what is established beyond the limits of this earthly life. There is a tendency within us to picture death as a kind of lingering space, a place where the soul hovers, watches, returns, or moves freely between worlds. It is a comforting thought to the natural mind that those we have lost are still near in the same way, still observing, still participating in the rhythm of our lives. But the Holy Spirit does not leave us to build our understanding on comforting images. He gently leads us into something far more certain, far more ordered, and far more eternal. Death is not confusion. It is not wandering. It is not an unfinished existence drifting between moments. It is a transition immediate and purposeful. When the final breath is taken, the soul does not remain behind, searching for familiarity or trying to reconnect with what it has left. There is a divine boundary, set by God Himself, that separates time from eternity. And in that moment, the soul steps out of what is temporary and into what is eternal. This is where human understanding often falls silent, because what lies beyond is not governed by the same rules we have known. Time as we experience it no longer holds its place. The attachments of this life, as strong and meaningful as they are, no longer define the soul's existence in the same way. There is an order, a clarity, a destination that is not shaped by human desire but by divine authority. The Holy Spirit reveals that the soul is not left to decide its own path after death. It does not roam in uncertainty, it does not return at will, it does not linger to communicate or complete unfinished conversations. There is a finality to that moment, a crossing over that is both decisive and irreversible in its direction. And yet this is not meant to bring fear. It is meant to bring understanding. Because when you begin to see death through the lens of truth, it loses the chaos that human imagination often assigns to it. It is no longer a mystery filled with wandering spirits or unresolved presence. It becomes a doorway, solemn, yes, but purposeful. A moment where the soul stands in a reality that is no longer influenced by the limitations of the physical world. And here is where the Holy Spirit brings a deeper clarity. The idea that those who have passed can move freely back and forth, observing the living, interacting, or making their presence known in tangible ways, this is not aligned with the order He reveals. It may feel comforting to believe that nothing has changed, that the connection remains in the same form, but the truth is, something profound has changed. The soul has entered eternity. And eternity is not an extension of this life, it is an entirely different realm of existence, governed by the presence and authority of God. What once was familiar is no longer central. What once was visible is no longer the focus. Everything shifts under the weight of divine reality. The Holy Spirit does not reveal this to distance you from your loved ones, but to anchor you in truth. Because if your understanding is built on the idea that they remain here in the same way, your heart may continue to reach for something that is no longer meant to be experienced in that form. And in that reaching, confusion can grow. But when truth settles in, something else takes its place. A quiet acceptance, a deeper reverence for the reality of eternity, and a release from the need to hold on to what cannot remain as it once was. You begin to understand that the moment of death is not a continuation of earthly patterns, it is a transition into divine order, and in that order everything is established according to God's purpose, not human expectation. And as this truth becomes clear, the soul finds rest, not in imagined closeness, but in the certainty that nothing is left to chance, and nothing exists outside of His perfect design. Because in the moment after death, the soul does not wander, it arrives. And as the soul begins to grasp this truth that death is not wandering, but arrival, another question gently rises from within, almost as a whisper carried by memory. If they have arrived, will I know them again? Will they know me? It is such a tender question. It does not come from curiosity alone, it comes from love. It comes from shared moments, from bonds that were formed over time, from laughter, tears, conversations, and silent understandings that words could never fully capture. And the thought of losing not only the presence of someone, but even the recognition of who they are, it touches something very deep within the human heart. The Holy Spirit does not ignore this question. He does not dismiss it as unimportant. Instead, He brings clarity, but not in the way the natural mind expects. Because once again, truth does not always mirror the patterns we are familiar with. It lifts us beyond them. There is an assurance that identity is not erased. The soul does not become empty, faceless, or without distinction. What God has created is not lost in eternity. There is continuity, there is awareness, there is a reality of being that does not simply dissolve. But the way that identity is experienced, the way that recognition functions, is not bound to the same framework as it is here. On this earth, relationships are central. They shape our lives. They define so much of who we are. We recognize one another through physical features, through voice, through shared history. Our connections are built within time, nurtured through experience, and sustained through presence. And so it is only natural to assume that eternity would simply continue these same patterns in a more perfect form. But the Holy Spirit reveals something deeper, something that requires the heart to shift its focus. In eternity, the center is no longer human relationship. The center is God Himself. And when the soul stands in that reality, everything else is seen through that divine presence. It is not that love is lost, it is that it is transformed. It is no longer limited, no longer defined by earthly roles or emotional dependency. It becomes something purer, something aligned completely with the nature of God. So the question of recognition is no longer about, will I know them the same way, but rather, how does all identity exist in the presence of God? And this is where the natural mind begins to struggle, because it wants familiarity, it wants continuity in the exact form it understands. It wants to hold on to the idea that nothing will change except the setting. But the Holy Spirit gently reveals something has changed, something far greater than we can fully comprehend in this moment. There is no confusion in eternity. There is no loss of awareness, but there is also no clinging to earthly definitions of relationship. The soul is no longer anchored in roles such as mother, father, friend, or spouse in the same way. Those identities belong to time, to a specific season within God's design. In eternity, all identity is drawn into one central reality, the presence of God. And in that presence, everything is known as it truly is, not as it once appeared through human limitation. There is clarity without the need for explanation. There is understanding without the need for memory to reconstruct it. There is a knowing that surpasses the way we currently recognize one another. This does not diminish love, it fulfills it. But it does mean that the expectation of simply continuing earthly relationships as they were must be released. Not because something is taken away, but because something infinitely greater takes its place. And this is where the Holy Spirit brings peace to the searching heart. Because the fear is not truly about recognition, it is about loss. It is about the fear that what was meaningful will no longer exist. But in truth, nothing that is of God is ever lost. It is transformed, elevated, and brought into its true purpose. So the heart begins to rest, not in trying to define eternity through earthly understanding, but in trusting that whatever awaits is perfectly aligned with the nature of God. And in that trust, the question itself begins to change. It is no longer driven by uncertainty, but softened by the quiet assurance that in His presence, nothing is misunderstood, nothing is misplaced, and nothing is outside of His perfect knowing. Because in eternity, recognition is no longer about remembering, it is about fully knowing. And as this understanding begins to settle into the heart, there is something else the Holy Spirit in His faithfulness must gently uncover. Because truth not only reveals what is, it also exposes what is not. And this is where the path becomes more delicate, more serious, and deeply necessary for the soul to discern. For where there is longing, there is also vulnerability. When the heart aches to see someone again, to hear their voice, to feel their presence just one more time, it opens itself in a way that is very tender. And in that openness, not every voice that answers is from God. Not every presence that feels familiar is what it seems. Not every experience that brings comfort carries truth within it. This is something many do not want to consider, because it challenges deeply personal experiences. There are those who will say, "I felt them near me." Others will speak of dreams so vivid they seemed more real than waking life. Some believe they have heard a whisper, sensed a touch, or encountered a moment that felt undeniably like a connection with the one they lost. And the emotion in those moments can be overwhelming, so real, so convincing, so deeply comforting. But the Holy Spirit does not confirm truth based on intensity of feeling. He reveals truth based on divine reality. And here is where discernment becomes not just important but essential. Because the enemy does not always come in darkness or fear. He can come in what feels like light. He can imitate what is familiar. He can present something that appears comforting, gentle, even loving. Yet beneath it is a subtle distortion, a quiet shift away from truth. Not obvious, not alarming at first, but enough to slowly lead the heart in the wrong direction. If the soul believes that the departed can return freely, can speak, can interact, can remain involved in the same way, then it begins to accept experiences without question. It lowers its guard. It welcomes what feels right, without asking whether it is true. And this is where deception finds its entrance. The Holy Spirit, in His love, does not expose this to create fear, but to establish protection. He brings light so that the soul is not misled. He brings clarity so that the heart is not drawn into something that appears comforting but is not anchored in God. Because once the heart begins to rely on these experiences, once it starts seeking them, longing for them, expecting them, it slowly shifts its focus away from God's truth and towards something else, something unstable, something that cannot sustain the soul. And the danger is not always immediate. It is subtle, gradual, a quiet leaning in the wrong direction, until what once was a simple longing becomes a dependence on something that was never meant to fulfill it. But oh, how faithful the Holy Spirit is. He does not leave the soul in confusion. He does not allow deception to go unnoticed when the heart is willing to be led. He gently corrects. He lovingly redirects. He brings a knowing deep within that says, "This is not from me." And when you begin to listen, truly listen, you will sense that difference. There is a peace that comes from truth, and there is a comfort that comes from imitation. One anchors you, the other entangles you. The Spirit of God will never lead you into dependence on experiences outside of His truth. He will never draw your heart towards something that replaces His presence. He will never confirm what contradicts the divine order He has already established. And so the heart must choose again. Will it follow what feels real, or what is real? Will it seek comfort at any cost, or truth that sustains eternally? This is not a small decision, it is a sacred one. Because it determines not only what you believe but what you allow into your spirit. And when the soul chooses truth, when it aligns itself with the voice of the Holy Spirit above all else, it becomes guarded, steady, and free from the subtle traps that once seemed so inviting. Not every presence is from God. Not every voice speaks truth. And not every comfort leads to life. Discernment is not optional. It is protection. And as all of this begins to settle, truth replacing assumption, clarity quieting confusion, discernment guarding the heart, something profound begins to happen within the soul. The question that once stood at the center, "Will I see them again?" slowly begins to shift. It does not disappear, but it no longer holds the same weight, the same urgency, the same central place it once occupied. Because the Holy Spirit, in His gentle and faithful way, begins to lift the eyes of the heart towards something higher. You see, the greatest misunderstanding about eternity is not simply about recognition or reunion, it is about focus. The human heart, shaped by love and loss, naturally places its attention on relationships, on connection, on the desire to be reunited with those it has known. And while that desire is deeply human, it is not the center of eternity. God is. And when the Holy Spirit begins to reveal this, it is not a correction that diminishes love, it is a revelation that reorders it. Because in this life, love is often experienced in fragments. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also limited. It is touched by time, affected by circumstance, shaped by human imperfection. Even at its best, it carries within it a sense of incompleteness, a quiet awareness that there is more, something deeper, something beyond what we can fully express or sustain. That more is not found in simply continuing what we have known. It is found in God Himself, and this is where everything begins to change. The Holy Spirit does not remove your love for those you have lost. He refines it, He lifts it out of the realm of longing that is bound to this world, and anchors it in something eternal. He begins to show you that what your heart is truly searching for is not just reunion but fulfillment, not just connection but completeness. And that completeness is not found in any person, it is found in the presence of God. This is a truth that the natural mind resists at first, because it feels as though something is being taken away. The idea that eternity is not centered on reuniting with loved ones can feel unsettling, even disappointing. But that is only because the heart has not yet fully seen what is being offered in its place. Because when the soul enters into the fullness of God's presence, it encounters a reality so complete, so overwhelming in its purity, that every longing finds its answer there. Not partially, not temporarily, but fully. There is no emptiness in Him. There is no lack. There is no unanswered desire. Everything that the heart has ever searched for, every sense of belonging, every need for love, every desire for peace is fulfilled in a way that surpasses anything this world could ever provide. And in that fulfillment, something remarkable happens. The need to hold on to earthly forms of connection begins to fade, not because they were not real, not because they were not meaningful, but because they have served their purpose within time. They were a reflection, a glimpse, a small expression of something far greater that was always pointing back to God. And now in eternity the soul stands in the fullness of that reality. The Holy Spirit brings you to this understanding step by step, not to distance your heart from love, but to anchor it in its true source. Because if your expectation of eternity is built primarily on reunion, your vision is still too small. It is still shaped by what you have known, rather than what God has prepared. But when your focus shifts, when it begins to center on Him, everything else finds its rightful place. There is no confusion there, no striving, no searching, only a complete and perfect alignment with the presence of God. And in that presence, nothing is missing. So the heart no longer clings in the same way. It no longer searches in uncertainty. It rests, not because it has all the details, but because it knows the one who holds them. And this is the final, quiet revelation the Holy Spirit brings to the soul. Eternity is not about who you will see, it is about who you will be with. And in Him, every longing finds its end.